I wanted today's episode to be a rather calm one where we do a Who is Max, the CTO of Ambient? Because people, I think, know the title and they assume they know the work that goes on behind it, but it's far from reality. So, what I want to do with today's podcast is get into what we do at Ambient here and what it takes to be here and kind of introduce the good hands that Ambient is in and talk about your very interesting path with Microsoft, Amazon, Cockroach Labs, Blend, and a few more that we'll uncover during the podcast. So now that we're with Ambient and it's been 2 years that you've been building, around 2 years in stealth, and here we are today. I was curious to kind of know, Max, how the week looks like working with Ambient. How does your typical week look like?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess, I'll admit that at our stage, there's still a lot of variety. I've definitely been at, startups that have started kind of where we're at and then get to a place where every 2 weeks you're doing much more planning and running against ticketing, and of course we do plenty of that as well, but we also just have a lot of things where we're listening to the users, where we're listening to like addressing any technical issues that are coming up. And it's, we've got our ear just a lot closer to the ground. And so we're a lot more reactive to that. I'm not saying other companies, don't listen to their users or anything like that. But, and of course, we can't, respond to everyone. Right now, we're a pretty small team. But, a lot of what we're doing right now is trying to kind of build the full set of features that we believe we want to kind of go live with on mainnet. And so, that can mean on any given week, I think, last week, for example, we were shipping out a new version that would help miners constantly stay updated on the latest version of Ambient. And we took everybody who, was working on various different work streams and brought everyone in for kind of an all hands on deck to get it over the line. Other times we'll have, like I said, multiple people working on different, pieces of the puzzle here. We had one engineer working on X402, but another engineer working on upgrading our LLM server and all these different pieces. As far as, my week goes, it's also quite variable in the sense that, there'll be times when I'm, down the weeds coding and, working on another feature or kind of just have I might be, doing something much more speculative and kind of forward looking, trying to build a tech demo or proof of concept to kind of prove to myself whether some particular technical direction is worthwhile or something like that, or working with Travis on kind of the broader direction of the company. So yeah, I think I would say right now it's very high variance, but typically we do have kind of we all meet up together first thing as a team. We're all a whole remote team, but we make sure to have kind of a touch point every day, and we meet together and then kind of sync up and share any announcements, look at how the system is doing, its health, and stuff like that, and then kind of make any decisions from there.
That's a lot of hats that you're juggling. And I love the fact that the team comes together every day, even though you guys are in different time zones and a lot of different work zones and flow, right? I think that's a good thing to know that this is the way you proceed with decisions as well. That's comforting and reassuring for people that there are a lot of brains and thoughts put into it. And one thing I was noticing, Max, while going through your profile or researching a little bit about you, is you've got the very classic early career stages in two of the biggest engineering environments on the planet, Microsoft as well as Amazon. Well, I actually want to know what they have taught you and how it kind of applies to Ambient today, because they're called the big tech, right? So, what does the big tech teach you about starting a startup or about something that's as, I would say, non constant as building in the AI space right now?
It's a good question. Some of it, some of the reason why I'm not in big tech anymore has to do with my temperament as well and what I
Okay.
enjoy. But I will say that, yeah, right out of school, joining Microsoft, I mean, at a big company, I guess I would say on the one hand, you do gain a degree of technical rigor. I was at Microsoft back in the days, and I don't know if they even still do this, but everybody had like you would be even partnered with a tester. So, every day the tester would be, that he would be coming up to me and saying, Max, here are all the things you broke. And here are the things you need to fix. And I try and fix it. And then, of course, this was like, I was actually working on, of all things, Bing shopping. And, there were like weird edge cases with high contrast mode or on straight, this was back in the days of like IE6 and, all sorts of browser quirks. And so it was very easy to break things constantly every day. I was also, I was working partially front end and I did other things as well. Like I I learned C sharp there, for example, for some of the, work I did with a reviewing tool that I was working on there. I think to me, I mean, the pro and the con, on the negative, uh, for me was that I really felt like just a very small piece of a very big puzzle, um, you know, cog, as you will. And, I think I struggled with that, with just kind of building in my little corner and, having, upper managers weigh in on, you know, like decisions that I kind of, made and feeling like, I basically was not being given a lot of leeway. Of course, I think as you get more senior, that changes. You do get access to a lot of excellent tooling. At Microsoft at that time, I, was curious about the shopping data and I did a bunch of data analysis kind of on my own time using Cosmos, which was basically a system that they had built out that allowed you to mix SQL and C sharp. And I did kind of these big data analysis jobs across all of the shopping data that they had. And it was pretty cool that I was just like, again, as a junior engineer, able to queue something up on this massive, system and massive database and have it execute these, giant map reduce jobs and stuff like that. So that was kind of fun. Yeah, I'd say like, certainly there was a degree of mentorship and a degree of, learning that technical rigor. I think the reason why I decided to seek out, startups ultimately was because I think I felt, at least at the time, that you learn a lot from, trying out different things and seeing them succeed or fail. At a big company, you're taught maybe like a good path and like, like Amazon, was very famous at the time that I was there for having like really good deployment infrastructure. And, it was much easier to kind of like deploy new machines there. And this was kind of, I want to say in the earlier days of AWS, but I'd have to double check the timeline. But it's like very easy for them to kind of deploy new machines. But startups at the time were even doing stuff where they were getting code out, same day as they were shipping it. They weren't, they were on Git and building these things, and they had these, CI/CD pipelines, which we were working towards. But I think startups often end up being a little bit on the bleeding edge, which can be very exciting and can kind of teach you a different set of things. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I learned, good, some good technical best practices there. And I also kind of learned a little bit why, or learned about some of these like bigger, tools that, I wouldn't necessarily have access to as like just an individual, but I also, didn't necessarily personally enjoy being at a big company where I had trouble kind of feeling my impact and my voice.